Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Harriet Seitler. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Brand Officer for CourseHero. Welcome to day 2 of what has been a really enriching and rewarding series of sessions with so much to talk about. I'm excited to welcome you to this session today, which is a little different from our other sessions. So I want to set the stage for what's happening. Today, we're hosting a live recording for a higher education podcast, really well-respected and popular podcast called FutureU, hosted by Michael Horn and Jeff Salingo, well-respected people in our world and good friends of CourseHero. Their guests today are Dr. Crystal White from the University of Memphis and Dr. Stephanie Spiker from Weber State, who many of you saw yesterday. And they're going to be having a conversation on how to create a culture of belonging in the classroom. Michael and Jeff will be inviting audience questions since this is a podcast. So please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A feature, and we may be able to address them for the podcast itself. If you're comfortable reading your question out loud, we'll invite you to the virtual stage so you can ask your question, but no worries if not. One of us can read the question for you. So bear with us as we get through all of that. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Crystal, Stephanie, Michael, and Jeff.
Thank you so much, Harriet. I'm really excited for this session today. And as Harriet mentioned, the FutureU podcast is being recorded. And just so you all have context, when Jeff and I started FutureU, we started it as a bi-weekly podcast. We launched it 6 years ago to bring newsmakers and people with knowledge and ideas about the future of higher ed to our listeners to help them better understand not only what was next for higher ed itself, but also for their own learning journey. We've gotten to interview university presidents, scholars, researchers, journalists, a range of other higher ed experts. And we've actually also gotten to take the show live to college campuses themselves. And today marks the first time that we're getting to record it live at a virtual conference. So I want to thank you all for being involved in this, but also, of course, a big thank you to CourseHero for their generous support of the podcast this season. Now, this show is being both audio and videotaped today, and a portion of it will edit it, but a portion of it will air in a few weeks. And we'll also probably have some video excerpts, depending on how that quality is, up at futureupodcast.com, where you can listen to all the past episodes and subscribe. And as Harriet mentioned, after Jeff and I ask some questions of our panelists today, we will have time for Q&A. So please, as you get in the flow of the conversation, submit your questions via the Q&A function. And if your question is selected, we really would love for you to come on video and ask it live. I think it'll make the episode that much more special. And we would love to just include your voices. The only request that Jeff and I have is that if you do come on camera to ask your question, just simply state your name, state your affiliation, and then ask a brief question that ends with a question mark. And with that housekeeping out of the way, we'll get started with the actual recording itself. Jeff, take it away.
Welcome to FutureU. I'm excited that we're able to bring you this bonus episode together in partnership with one of our season-long sponsors, CourseHero. We're recording this episode in front of a live virtual audience at CourseHero's annual summit, Michael.
That's right, Jeff. And we're not only excited to be recording an episode during a virtual conference, but today we also get to dive into 2 topics that connect to something that, Jeff, you talk about often, namely the importance of belonging and the success equation at colleges and universities. And we get to have this conversation with 2 faculty members who aren't just going to talk about the question of engaging students, but also what this looks like at the faculty level for professors who have been historically underrepresented in academia.
Yeah, Michael, while the racial and ethnic diversity of college faculty in the U.S. has increased over the past 2 decades, faculty are still much more likely to be white. About 3/4 of post-secondary faculty members in the U.S. are white, compared with about half of undergraduates. So there's this disparity between the 2 groups. And, Michael, this came into stark contrast a few years ago when I was asked to speak at the convocation at New Jersey City University. And when they asked the students to stand, the majority of the students were students of color, and there in the middle of the audience were the faculty, who were mostly white. And as one of the students who was Black told me afterwards, it wasn't until her senior year that she had a Black professor in one of her courses. So to discuss this divide and what impact it has on belonging in the classroom and how it impacts teaching and learning, we're welcoming two faculty members today to the virtual stage here at the Course Hero Summit. First, we have Crystal White. Crystal is an associate professor of teaching at the University of Memphis, and we'll be talking with her about what's needed to recruit and retain faculty members who have historically been underrepresented in academia. We also have Stephanie Spiker, who is the associate professor in teacher education at Weber State University in Utah. She's going to help us unpack this question of how to better engage students at colleges and university, which of course, colleges and universities, which of course is a theme we've come back to repeatedly this year on the podcast. And so, Crystal and Stephanie, welcome to FutureU.
It's great to be here.
Indeed it is. Thank you for having us.
Well, we're excited. And before we dive into the meat of the conversation, if you will, we want to start with a question that we love to ask guests, but candidly, we haven't had the chance to do so in recent episodes. But it's a question that I think, given our topics, is quite pertinent here. And so we'd love you to share your own paths into working in higher education. Crystal, why don't you kick us off?
All right. So how do we all begin, right? I believe that it begins with a passion. And when thinking about my path into higher ed, I guess I can say it started when I was really, really young. I lined up all my stuffies and the dolls and, had a fake chalkboard right in front of me. And, they were engaging. They were raising their hands, the whole nine. I mean, it was just me by myself, but, my students were participating and I was engaging with them. I was learning from them. It was very reciprocal. So I can say that my path into higher ed actually started with a passion that's, real deep into my childhood. And it's just continued to grow ever since. I'm in ed psych and research, and I've beautifully married both my passion for education and psychology in the work that I do. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Stephanie, why don't you tell us about your path into higher ed?
I'm sitting here chuckling because instead of using my stuffies, I used my siblings. So, it does. I think it is. It's a passion that leads us to a place where we really want to make an impact. And for me, I started my teaching career 30 years ago as a high school history teacher. And at that time, I had the opportunity to engage in some professional development and really fell in love with wanting to impact teachers early on in their training and development. And I knew that I had to do that in a higher education landscape. I spent several years trying to do that with a bachelor's degree. Then I tried doing that with a master's degree. And then I continued to get turned down for positions just because I did not have I didn't have the degree. Now, I will say that I gained an incredible insight in education in my doctoral work. And it was part of getting into this higher education world in which I am now. And I'm grateful.
Just a great story from both of you. And, as somebody with two young kids, or now a little bit older, I remember them playing school in much the same way with their siblings, with their stuffed animals as well. And I always wondered, sometimes they didn't like going to school, but they liked teaching school. But it also is interesting because, we hear similar stories about kids all the time. And I hope that it will encourage a new generation of teachers and professors in the future, just like it seems to have encouraged both of you. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're facing right now in higher education, and particularly around student engagement. So Stephanie, I want to start with you about exploring this question, namely, how do we create an environment in which students want to engage? Michael and I have been hearing from faculty and administrators about the low level of student engagement right now. Is that what you're seeing? And what's the real challenge institutions are facing to engage students?
Yes, and yes. And to begin, it seems like it's such a simple question. One where even from many of us, we think back to our own education experiences where it was just assumed that you were going to participate, that you were engaged in the learning experience. And we know now we're in this we're in a new paradigm of teaching and learning that I think frankly began before COVID, but then COVID really accelerated what was what was already happening and what our students were needing. I'll pose this question to all of you, and this will help set this of why this is such an important question and why this is difficult for us. Is if we all think back, I want you to think back, and this is for everybody on the call, think back to the moment that you learned to read. And potentially, maybe you can remember that moment. Many of us probably don't necessarily remember that moment. I don't remember the moment I learned to read. It's just ingrained in part of what I do. And some of us, I'm sure, have different stories. Our students that are entering into our college campuses now, they have no memory of what it was like before an iPhone. It is just part of the way that they engage in the world. The technology that they are using to navigate and engage in spaces is completely different than what we experienced in a span of one generation. No wonder this is difficult. No wonder this is challenging for us. And so we find that we are now in these really deep, complex problems of how we're engaging students and bringing them to college campuses. So I'll just briefly share a couple examples that I think that are important to as we think about how do we engage and as we're inviting students into our spaces. One, be present. Think about how you're creating an environment that your students actually want to be in, that you want to be in. Take the time to explain to the students your why, find out their why, find out who they are, what brings them to the classroom, right? That's all about being present in the space and thinking deeply about how we're crafting a learning experience. Even now, right? Thinking about how we set the tone for this podcast, wanting to set that stage, inviting people into this space so they would want to be engaged with us. That's really critical. I also think it's important. Lately, I've been really into reading Dr. Keltner's work from UC Berkeley, and it's about the science of awe. And on the backdrop of this, recently a report came out from the Surgeon General that we are now in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation.
Yeah. If
that doesn't really think about how we need to use that in our spaces to create engaging spaces, it's critical.
And Stephanie, we're gonna be spending more time on the solutions to the problems that you are identifying. But Crystal, I kind of want to get a sense of what you're seeing at the University of Memphis. Are you seeing, a kind of student engagement or disengagement that might be similar to what Stephanie shared with us?
Yes and no. So definitely not just at the University of Memphis, but also, other campuses and then across the board from K-12 all the way up through higher ed. Kind of like Stephanie mentioned, there was a major paradigm shift that happened because of COVID, as we know. So that modality shifted. It created a kind of this burden, this culture, right? Where students were already kind of somewhat disengaged, but then it created another layer, another barrier with COVID, especially, just having to shift that modality. Kind of coupling with what Stephanie said as well, like the being present and why, I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the community of care, is something that has definitely been missing and definitely something that needs to be addressed as well.
No, so I want to stay with you, Crystal, then off that for a moment, just to tie together these questions and challenges really around student engagement with who is at the front of the room in the classrooms and lecture halls. Research has found that students of color who have educators of the same race or ethnicity are more likely to, look to those teachers as role models and to then report greater effort in school on their behalf and so forth. So I'm just sort of curious to level set us. In your view, what's the current state of recruiting faculty of color? And what are the central challenges that still need to be addressed in that area?
Oh boy. Well, let's be quite candid here. The current climate is mostly don't ask, don't tell, right? Current, legislator related to DEI initiatives on campuses, et cetera, has made these kinds of conversations, these kinds of questions pretty difficult to answer. But what I can say is that, statistics continue to show that Black faculty comprise roughly 6%. And that's mostly due to how faculty of color and other historically marginalized groups of faculty members continue to be mistreated at all different types of institutions. You asked about recruitment. It's happening at the recruitment level. It's also happening at the retention level. And it's also, most importantly, happening at the mentoring and advancement levels within the academy, right? So these different groups of faculty and their intersecting identities are either not entering or they're exiting very swiftly due to so many of these issues. Yesterday, during my talk with Dr. Bridget Turner Kelly, we talked a lot about recruitment, retention, and mentoring of Black faculty in academia, and how there's oftentimes this bait and switch, right? They bait you in, and then some kind of way they almost, forget, or, it's a switch, or it's not as much effort put in to kind of level the playing field, so to speak, for faculty of color, right? So we talked a little bit about invisible and unpaid labor that we contribute to diverse student populations, unequal distribution of work, right? Feeling overworked, undervalued, and definitely, as we know, the entire state of education, teachers, faculty, staff, were underpaid. And so then, not only to mention some of the tenure battles and failure for, certain departments to support advancement as it relates to that. And so lastly, we also talked about like the lack of safe spaces, right? So some of these unchecked microaggressions, hostile climates that are consistently being perpetuated within academia, making us maybe not even want to enter, or making us want to leave just as fastly as we entered. So when we kind of think about those things, obviously, there are some ways to combat this, and we will talk about that shortly.
Yeah, and I want to kind of move to the solutions on both fronts, both engaging students and how do we get a more diverse pipeline into the faculty. Clearly there are challenges on both fronts in terms of engaging students in the classroom, particularly given that these digital natives, as Stephanie mentioned, right? They don't know a time before the iPhone really even existed. And as Crystal just laid out some of the challenges with faculty, not only in terms of recruiting faculty, but then finding and mentoring faculty of color and getting them through the tenure and promotion process at many places. So let's discuss what we might do to address some of these challenges. And Stephanie, let me turn to you first. What do you know? You started to lay out a little bit earlier, being present and helping students understanding their why. What do we know? What else do we know that works in engaging students and creating a better sense of belonging in the classroom?
Yeah, I'll share two examples. And one is really thinking about our being strategic in the beginning of the semester, really how we are crafting those very gentle, fragile first weeks of the semester, where we are building relationships. We're learning who our students are and how we want to connect with them. In teacher education, and some of you might remember this maybe from your own experience as a student, we use the term attention getter, right? Like, how am I going to get students' attention? I like to switch that around, and I like to think about how am I using connection getters in my classroom. So interestingly enough, and I've been so grateful to have hear Priya Parker speak as part of our summit, and also reading her book. She talks about that in a gathering, and I think about this in the classroom. Our students remember the first 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes, in some climatic moment, right, in the class. So those first 5 minutes, what am I doing to deliberately connect the students to each other? What am I doing to connect the students to the content that we're going to be teaching in that class? And then I think about those last 5 minutes about how am I going to connect those dots over what did they just learn? And then thinking about how to connect them to the next learning experience. So really thinking deeply, no matter what your discipline or content area is, I think about, I had a teacher once when I was a kid, first day of school, walked into school, first 5 minutes. All right, everybody, we're going to take a math quiz. You talk about I was going to say a buzzkill
kind of
for
downer,
us as
yeah.
grownups, right? But like, awful, and it's about how we're crafting that space. So I would say really thinking deeply about that. And then one other just real quick piece of
well, Stephanie, before you move to that
take
second
it, Crystal.
piece,
Yeah,
just when you're thinking about the disengagement at both the student level and the faculty level, there's been a lot of research that basically says it's because we have these unauthentic learning experiences. And so exactly what you're talking about, right? That connection. I always like to explain or express to my students, a lot of whom are going to be future teacher educators, that it's important to bridge the gap between theory to practical application, right? And that's exactly what you're explaining here, right? So making those connections and letting them see that these experiences that they are learning, they're not unauthentic, right? They have meaning and they have purpose. And then for them to be able to connect those dots and really to see this come to life within their respective fields is how we really keep them engaged, right? So a lot of times my research goes into like making sure that things are culturally relevant or culturally sustaining within their assessments and within their activities that they're engaged in within the classroom. And that's the same way with us, with our research and the things that we're doing within our respective colleges and universities.
Yeah, I mean, relevance clearly is
Yep.
key here, right? Because if you're sitting in a classroom, either virtually or even in person, and what you're learning is not relevant, you don't understand why you're learning it or how you're going to apply it ever. Or if you're going to apply it, by the way, years from now, you probably won't remember it anyway. So the relevancy is the key there. But, I still don't think higher education does this well today. You're both offering solutions, but, for all those leaders out there who are listening today or watching us live during this virtual conference, what's it going to take to get there? What are some of the structural barriers? In other words, we kind of know what to do. We just can't sometimes get out of our own way to do it. So what should institutions do to kind of tackle these structural barriers? And Stephanie, let me start with you on that.
I think it begins with really thinking deeply about first, who is at the table having these conversations, who and what is, and the ideas that are being represented. And also being willing, and this is a very big picture, and then I'll narrow down, but really being willing to kind of start completely over. I know at the university in which I teach, we're in the midst of building 2 new big buildings. When we found out 60% of our course offerings are being offered online starting in the fall. I mean, it's about rethinking the way that we engage in teaching and learning, being willing to reimagine what does teaching and learning and what do our students need in the 21st century. And I'll just say this is where we need to shift from our classroom spaces being designed as a traditional lecture format to spaces that actually encourage active and communal and cooperative learning, right? Where you walk into a classroom, you have no idea where the front is. And I would say, again, speaking from my own experience, 80% of the classrooms I walk into now, I can tell you exactly where the front is and who is in charge and who is the leader, right? We have to completely rethink that. So I'll just say tangibly, think about your space and how we have to create the spaces in order to create the learning environments and the communities that we want to see. So from, really thinking about active learning classrooms to redesigning the way that we're asking students to engage with our curriculum, experiential modalities and immersive study experiences or internships, the list goes on, but really rethinking the way that we're engaging in curriculum. That's hard. That's very hard because all of us have been indoctrinated into a way of learning because we have also, the majority of us have gone through the American system of education. Crystal, maybe you've got to want to take it away from there.
Yeah, I don't know if you have
Jeff.
anything to add. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add, Crystal, to that, but otherwise, Michael, back to you.
Yeah, well, let me jump in, Crystal, with a question to take it over to the faculty member side, because we've just heard some themes right in both of your answers: connection, relevance, active, really rethinking, quote unquote, the front of the room, right? How do we make it more cooperative? I'm curious, how do we better support those who want to be faculty members and are from diverse backgrounds? What does the solution there look like? Where does it pull from these things? And where do you start to think of other ideas that come in to help us with those challenges that you mentioned?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, just, in terms of the connection and active learning, rethinking the front of the room and so forth, right? How do those themes connect to solving a lot of the challenges that you mentioned in terms of fixing the leaky pipeline we have right now, right, around getting diverse faculty members to get tenure and to be there and be present? Are those some of the same themes that you would point to address the solutions? And what else would you add?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to kind of piggyback just a little bit off of Stephanie here, where she mentioned, kind of really, in my own words, shaking things up a little bit. And then in a sense, the way that I look at that is, creating more improvisational or playful spaces in which both students can be engaged and they can, get this feeling of everything that's going on within the classroom. But then also on the faculty end, as far as addressing some of the issues that I brought up earlier, breaking up some of those traditional modes, right? So some of those antiquated things that are no longer working or no longer effective for our faculty of color or our even diverse student population is going to be something that is going to have to take place and going to have to shift. A lot of the research that I've done deals with like imaginative play across the lifespan. And so bringing in some of those unique learning experiences. I've said a couple of times, I made a mistake. It's okay. We're just going to keep rolling with it, take a couple of deep breaths, and, we keep moving forward. And I think that that's something that we have to be ready to do, right? So when we think back to how this started for both myself and Stephanie, these were playful experiences in our childhood that led to these passions, and we've just continued to build and grow. And it's okay if you make one or two mistakes. Just like you said, we have the tools, we know what to do. We just need to implement them, put them in place, make a couple of mistakes, celebrate those mistakes, and keep moving forward.
Some really good thoughts there, Crystal. Just one more question, after which we're going to go to our audience Q&A. So those of you who have asked questions, if some of you are ready to come on camera and ask it, that'd be terrific. But also get in your questions now because we're about to go there. Crystal, just to end with you on this question from me and Jeff, I'm just curious if there are institutions out there that you'd say they're doing this well, right? And if you're willing to name them, that would be terrific as well. But just trying to see, are there good models, in other words, that we can pin our hat to and other schools can really replicate or learn from?
Michael, you're trying to get me in trouble here. Well, let's just be completely transparent. I do believe, did I lose my audio?
Oh, you're good.
Okay, so we're still good. I just can't hear myself talking, and that's just fine. I don't like how I sound. So to answer the question, I do believe that there are several institutions across our nation, across our globe that are attempting, right, at different collegiate levels, department levels, and even program levels. They are attempting. And as mentioned before, due to our current state, we have a kind of don't ask, don't tell. We kind of got a sticky situation going on with DEI right now. We are working towards things, but a lot of these are so systemically ingrained and entwined that we really do have to, kind of move away from. So some schools that I've actually kind of did a little bit of research on that are moving a little bit more proactively across the board. One, I could definitely say Columbia University, right? They've been praised for improving their racial climate by being one of the first universities in the U.S. to create an African-American advocacy group and, allocating millions of dollars in funds specifically for Black faculty recruitment and retention. We could model after them, right? Also, Emory University, UC Irvine, UNC Chapel Hill, Also, I cannot forget, although I am not a member of an HBCU alumni, I must say that HBCUs across the board have definitely for years been able to continue to do this move towards successful recruitment, retention, as well as mentoring, and continuing to advance their Black faculty and other faculty of color.
This is just great in terms of the feedback that we're also getting in the comments, and just a terrific conversation about a set of twin issues that kind of connect, relate, and have big implications for where higher education is going. We want to now go to some audience questions and feature your voices on the podcast. And Michael, I think we have a few questions that have come in during this conversation.
Yeah, we have several coming in. We're going to go live to one. Andre Kohler, if we can bring you up on the spotlight, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you can correct me when you come on and do it right. Pronunciation is not my strong suit. And go ahead and ask your question. So if the Course Hero team can spotlight Andre, that'd be terrific. Just stand by for a sec while we get that.
This is like a real conference where you're waiting for the microphone to get to the person.
Microphone coming around.
Right? That's all we could just imagine, right? That we're waiting for somebody to come up to the microphone or get the microphone to them.
Well, while we're waiting, I'm just let me ask a different question that came in as we get Andre set up there, and it's from, I believe, Kat White, who asked Stephanie and Crystal, are you finding that students are more engaged in person or online these days? You know, Stephanie, you were mentioning in particular changing, right, the way the quote unquote classroom is shaped and the design and so forth, and perhaps rethinking the lecture hall design and things of that nature. What are you both finding in your practice right now?
I think it's hard. I think it depends. Each is unique based on what a student wants and what they bring to the particular learning environment. So for example, I've got students in face-to-face classes where, I see we're about to go live here, which is great. And I can pause or I can keep going.
No, just okay,
start
with your answer. We'll go through
so
this.
Awesome. So I've had students that, in my face-to-face classes where you think I've got this incredible engaging environment and they are disconnected, right? They've got their laptop on, you think they're taking copious notes and man, they're on Amazon, right? And then the same thing might hold true, right? On our online classes when we're teaching, for example, in a platform like Zoom. We think our students potentially might be disconnected because it's easy to disconnect, but I actually find often it's easier to connect because people are in spaces where they are often comfortable. And so it's sometimes easier to be more present in those learning spaces. And I think, again, this is where the role of us as faculty is that we cannot underestimate really the importance and the power of the spaces that we create with as teachers, and that what we're facilitating in those spaces to help students engage. So my answer is it depends, and it's really up to you to really think deeply about how you're crafting that, and really how you are, again, as we're thinking about the pedagogy and the principles of engagement that we can bring in to help our students engage with us and the content.
Terrific. Well, with that, let's go to Andre and come on and read your own question, which is exciting for Stephanie and Crystal.
Yes, thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me.
We sure can.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So, Dr. White, you were talking about unsafe spaces. And so I'll just kind of read my question. What are your recommendations for navigating those more gray spaces where the climate is not overly hostile to diverse faculty and students, but there isn't a real effort to recruit, mentor, and retain them, up to and including promotion and salary advancement for faculty and administrators, particularly those who are not of the majority culture within the organization? Thank you.
Thank you for such a beautiful question. One of the things that I would like to say is, possibly institutionalizing some sort of paradigm shift that implements the ABCs, right? So acceptance, belongingness, and then communicative community. And an example of that I can share is actually happening right here at the University of Memphis. We have a Women's Plus mentorship network in which individuals across our university include Women Plus faculty, students, both undergraduate and graduate, and staff members that come together for different professionalization activities, events, as well as book clubs and writing opportunities. And so because this is a small group inside of the university that is representative of interdisciplinary groups, we are able to bring up some of these issues and concerns and come up with solutions and then bring them back to our upper administration, and then as well continue to support one another. So as we're navigating some of these more challenging and difficult spaces, we are able to kind of come up with some solutions that we can actually push back to our higher admin and gain support or gain better solutions that are going to be systemically implemented at our institution. I definitely feel like mentoring at that type of level, the more apprenticed mentoring is definitely something that could be beneficial and that could help to address some of these issues, right? So almost thinking task force teams and things of that nature, if that makes sense.
Terrific. Andre, thank you for your question on the show. And let's go to Diane Wilcox, who has a question from the Georgia Military College. Can we bring Diane up to ask audio for the podcast? Give it a second. Perfect.
Okay. Hello, I'm Diane Wilcox from the Deep South. So we are a teaching institution, and we have very much flipped our model in the last few years. So you see, I teach in-seat, I teach remote. We have a high number of dual enrollment students and online. So recreating the space in which our students learn is highly relevant. Improvisation is key. Improvisation. Excuse me, I'm also a musician, I messed that up. So how do we move from the traditional instructor-centered education to student-centered instruction? This is what I'm hearing from the disengaged students. It's not about us anymore, it's about them. So how do we use this student-centered approach to combat decreased student engagement?
Wonderful. Stephanie, why don't you take first stab at it? And then Crystal, if you have anything to add, jump right on in.
Sounds great. Diane, thanks for that question. My teacher heart is singing because I completely agree with you. And when we create a student-centered, or as I like to say, it's human-centered classroom, an idea where we are all part of this learning environment, it's amazing what we can accomplish. The transition, though, is difficult. And so my first initial response would be to start small. If you're at a university that's supporting a change in pedagogy, I think we all know that it's here. I feel like I really don't have a choice. I cannot stand up in front of another classroom reading off slides again and look out into a sea of 50 eyes, which are not engaged with me, right? And so I really felt like I had no choice. So I think for those of us that are new to this, I would say engage with, many of our universities have centers for engaged teaching and learning, or our teaching and learning forums or centers that provide opportunities for us to think about student-centered pedagogy, ways that we are rethinking or reframing the lecture, the way that we are using digital tools to engage with our students and create that sense of community. For those of us that might be more experienced or have been doing student-centered pedagogy for years, and I know for me, that's where I was, and then COVID just was like It totally shook me up and was like, Steph, you've got to rethink this. And so for me, this is where the digital pedagogy has really elevated for me, where I'm really thinking deeply about how do I use the tools and the resources that are available to me, and not necessarily in gamification, which we could have a big conversation about as well, but how am I using those to create community? How am I using those tools to bridge and create student-centered spaces? For example, Flipgrid, something very basic as that, or the Google suite of tools, or from Jamboards, and collaborative tools where we're deliberately and creating learning experiences. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we have to rethink the assessments that we're giving and the assignments, not just the learning experiences, but this is where our authentic, that's a big one, authentic assessment design comes in, and that it's relevant. What Crystal was saying earlier, that it cannot be just some contrived 100 question multiple choice test. We need to think deeply about what and how we're creating and the relevance for our students.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. We have time for 2 more questions, and we so many great questions coming in. I wish we could get to them all. And next, we're going to ask for Liz Fountain to come up to the virtual stage. Hi, Liz.
Hey. Hi, thank you very much. I'm a senior lecturer, which means contingent faculty at a regional university in a kind of semi-rural part of my state of Washington. And our institution is hurting financially. And so my question comes from that context where I'm worried about my teacher colleagues, right? And I'm worried about how much we are being asked to do more with less. There's a real fixation on the bottom line. Workloads are increasing, budgets are shrinking, and we're being asked to step authentically into these spaces with our students. So it's more of a request for maybe some empathy, and also any comments you might have about how we help each other in that dilemma, right? Of trying to really engage our students when we are also in a system that is hurting our humanity.
Stephanie, you or me?
So you take it, because I'm just sitting here. I want to make heart symbols. There's all kinds of heart emojis. Crystal, you start, because I started the last one, and then I'll fill in from there.
Yeah, so to be quite candid with you, what can we do? I mean, the entire nation knows that we're underpaid, overworked, and that we are the educators for all of the major fields across our nation, right? This is not something that's unknown. So until we actually have some people to step up, mobilize, and begin to activate, right, and to speak out, similar to what I've seen here in my city, where we've had police officers and firemen actually kind of stand up and, really kind of through activism, just to speak upon what it is that we need. I don't really see it happening. Stephanie, and I'll chime back in just a second.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I don't want to be painting, and I'm going to date myself here, a Pollyanna or like a unicorns and rainbows picture, because Liz, you are exactly correct. When I think about when our students need the most of us, and again, as I mentioned earlier, when we were talking about this latest report about the loneliness and isolation and our own needs as faculty and our own well-being and what we're expected to give of ourselves in these spaces when we're already depleted ourselves. This is where I'll speak to the administrators that I hope are on our call or that will be listening to this podcast. There is incredible power to rethink the way that we design these learning spaces. I'm in an institution we've just always been a 4-4. And for those of you that's, it's a teaching load of 4-4. Well, can we revisit that, right? That's 100 years old decision about the way that we engage and what is needed for me as a faculty member in these spaces. And so we really, administrators, and I think you got to be willing to put some teeth into it, be willing to ask the hard questions, be willing to talk to your board of directors with difficult conversations. And again, I'm not, I'm a professor. I don't necessarily have that power, but I hope that I can immerse myself into spaces. And this is what I encourage for all of us, where we can engage in those conversations, where we can begin to potentially have that impact.
Yes, Stephanie, what I kind of like feel that this conversation has led to on all levels, everything that we've talked about is going back to what I said earlier, is a solution, is to building a community and a culture of care that is absolutely critical at both the student level, the teacher level, the professor level. And you even invited the administration in to come in if they can build and model, right, and cultivate a community and a culture of care by allowing students to come in and have these courageous conversations with them without any reprimand or things of that nature. We can definitely see some things moving forward and some things begin to change.
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you, Liz, for that question. And we have our final question for the podcast, and that's from Carolyn Wiley. Carolyn?
Hello, this is a great session. Thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes,
We
we
sure
can.
can.
Okay, I'm Carolyn Wiley, a professor of management and human resources at Roosevelt University in Chicago. So I'm privileged to be on this conversation with you. I put in a note saying that too many universities say that they're teaching institutions, but they do not give the appropriate time, money, and credit to our field of teaching. But nevertheless, my question was and is, how would you suggest bringing students back into the game of creating dialogue and peer learning and being keen to understand from their peers, understand others' perspectives and apply them to their life experience?
Crystal, Stephanie, you each want to take 30 seconds on that?
Yeah, I'll say we must, and this goes back to what I was saying, to the best of our ability, we need to create the learning experiences and the assessments that gently guide and force our students to engage in this dialogue. And we need to teach them those skills ourselves. We have to remember our students, they need practice just as much as we do. They need practice on how to engage in dialogue, and it's up to us to craft those experiences.
I believe a lot of these learning experiences come from experience and exposure, exactly what Stephanie's explaining here. So when we create and we cultivate these particular learning spaces that are a little bit more authentic in nature, you can even, it even comes into play where Stephanie said earlier about the spaces within the classroom itself. A lot of times we may just have to change the dynamics and the structure of the actual seats and tables within our classroom. We're on a Zoom platform right now. A lot of times when you're engaged in these online classes, you may have to just have a round robin conversation, bounce ideas off of one another. Don't be afraid to interrupt and to share your ideas and to bring things forward. You can move the tables and chairs around in your classroom, set it up more like, corporate style, like a round table or, a conference room or something of that nature. And on the more academic level, these more conference style, where, students are bringing up particular issues and then they kind of round robin or gallery walk and share ideas, use their Post-it notes in the classroom and share their additional ideas, because that is what is happening in the real world. And they need to have more of these authentic experiences and exposures in their everyday practices, even within the classroom.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you so much.
And this is a perfect place, I think, to wrap it up. We've heard today a powerful call for leadership along with connection and relevance and community and a real culture of care. And while I will take Stephanie's thought to heart that we might favor connection getters over attention getters in the classroom, we also hope that this podcast recording has gotten some attention on some important topics. And as we wrap up our 6th season of FutureU with this bonus episode, I just want to say a huge thank you, firstly, to Crystal White and Stephanie Spiker. I really, really appreciate you engaging with us and coming into these important conversations. Of course, a huge thank you to CourseHero, not just for today, but for sponsorship all year long. And they've been sponsoring the CourseHero question, all year long on the podcast episodes as well, which has just been a terrific addition to the show this year. And finally, thanks to all of you in the audience who have gone with us on this journey for this first live recording of a podcast as part of the Course Hero Summit. But truly on behalf of me, Jeff, and of course, Course Hero, we appreciate all of you. And with that, we'll wrap up, and I'll just say enjoy the rest of the summit as you continue to go to the rest of the sessions today, and enjoy then the weekend as we exit out of this session. But thank you all, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.